The Story of a Soul, the Autobiography of the Little Flower. Chapter 6, Trip to Rome. 3 days after our pilgrimage to Bayeux, I set out on a far longer one, this time to the Eternal City. I saw splendid monuments, studied treasures of art and religion, and most wonderful of all, stood on the very soil that the apostles trod, the soil bedewed with martyrs' blood. And from its contact with these sacred things, my soul grew strong, while I learned the emptiness of things that pass. I am glad I went to Rome, only I can see why some thought Father took me on this pilgrimage to change my views about the religious life. A vocation not so secure might have been shaken. To start with, Céline and I found ourselves mixing with members of the aristocracy. In fact, the pilgrimage seemed to be made up of them, but we were not impressed, and looked upon their high-sounding titles as nothing more than a vapour of smoke. The words of the Imitation, "Do not be solicitous for the shadow of a great name," were not lost on me, and I realised that real nobility is in the soul, not in a name. Isaiah says that the Lord shall call his servant by another name. And in St. John we read, "To him that overcometh I will give a white counter, and on the counter a new name written, which no man knoweth, but he that receiveth it." We shall be told our titles of nobility in heaven. Then shall every man have praise from God. And the one who chose for love of God to be the poorest and most obscure on earth will be the first and the richest and most glorious in heaven. This was the one thing I learned. Another was about priests. Up to then, the principal aim of the Carmelite reform was a mystery to me. I was quite happy to pray for sinners, but the idea of praying for priests seemed surprising because I thought their souls must be crystal pure. But I grasped my vocation while I was in Italy, and this alone would have made the whole journey worthwhile. I met many saintly priests that month, but I also found out that in spite of being above angels by their supreme dignity, they were none the less men and still subject to human weakness. If holy priests, the salt of the earth, as Jesus calls them in the Gospel, have to be prayed for, what about the lukewarm? Again, as Jesus says, "If the salt shall lose its savour, wherewith shall it be salted?" What a magnificent vocation we have! It is for us in Carmel to preserve the salt of the earth, to be the apostles of our Lord by our prayers and sacrifices, while they preach the gospel to others by word and example. What a noble task! But I must not run on here, or my pen would never stop. To go back to the journey itself, let me tell you more details. Lisieux was still shrouded in darkness as we passed through its silent streets on the morning of November 4th. I seemed to be off into the unknown with wonderful things in store for me. When we got to Paris, Father made us see all the sights, but for me, Our Lady of Victories was everything. I can't describe what I experienced at her shrine. The graces she gave me there were like those of my first communion, filling me with peace and happiness. In this sanctuary, Mary, my mother, made it quite clear to me that it really was she who had smiled on me and cured me. With all my heart, I begged her to keep me far from all occasion of sin, and to make my dream come true by casting about me her mantle of virginity. I knew quite well that during this pilgrimage I should meet with things which might upset me. I knew nothing about evil and was afraid of finding it. To the pure, all things are pure. The simple and upright see no evil, because it does not exist in inanimate things, only in impure things. But I have not found that out yet. As devotion to Saint Joseph had always from the beginning been closely bound up with my devotion to Our Lady, I prayed to him that he might take care of me too. And I used to say every day the prayer, Saint Joseph, Father and Protector of Virgins. Under such patronage, I knew I was out of harm's reach. We left Paris on November 7th, after consecrating ourselves to the Sacred Heart in the Basilica of Montmartre. On the train, every compartment was given a saint's name, the patron saint of a priest in the compartment of his parish being chosen in his honour. In front of everybody, ours was named after St. Martin, and the compliment so moved Father that he went at once to thank Monseigneur Legoux, the Vicar General of Coutances, who was directing the pilgrimage. After this, several people always referred to Father as Monseigneur Saint Martin. Father Reveroni was keeping a sharp eye on me, and I could see this even at a distance. If I did not happen to be sitting opposite him at the table, he used to lean forward so that he could see and hear what I was doing. He must have been satisfied, as he seemed in the end to be more favourable toward me. I say in the end, because you will soon see, in Rome, he was anything but my advocate. Before reaching the goal of our pilgrimage, we had to go through Switzerland, with its towering mountains, whose snow-capped peaks were lost in the clouds, with its waterfalls and its deep valleys, rich with giant ferns and purple heather. This profusion of nature's loveliness did so much good to my soul, raising it to the God who had poured such wonders on a land of exile, destined to endure for but a day. At one moment we were high upon the mountainside, with yawning chasms at our feet, ready to engulf us. At another, passing through a charming village with flimsy clouds, lazily wandering over its chalets and graceful spire. Then by a broad lake with calm, clear waters, mingling their azure with the crimson of a setting sun. I cannot say what an impression the magnificence and grandeur of these scenes made upon me. It was a foretaste of heaven's wonders. Then I thought of the religious life as it really is, with its restrictions and its little hidden sacrifices every day, and I saw how easily one might become so taken up with oneself that one might forget the glorious purpose of one's vocation. I thought to myself, later on, in the hour of trial, when enclosed in Carmel, I shall only be able to see a little corner of the sky. I will look back on today and be encouraged. The thought of God's majesty and greatness will put my own small troubles in their place. I will love him alone and not make myself unhappy by being taken up with trivialities, now that I have caught a glimpse of what heaven has reserved for those he loves. I turn my attention then from the works of God to those of men. Milan was the first Italian city we came to, and we were particularly interested in the white marble cathedral there, which contained enough statues to populate a town. Céline and I left the more timid ladies of the party, who gave up after climbing the first flight of the tower steps, and followed the bolder pilgrims to the topmost turret, enchanted at the sight of the whole of Milan at our feet, with its inhabitants like tiny ants. We came down from our vantage point, and then set out on interminable carriage drives, which were to go on for a month and cure me forever of all desire for easy travelling. We were enthralled by the Campo Santo, The white marble statues in this vast cemetery were chiselled with such genius that they seemed alive, and all the more enchanting because seemingly placed at random. There was such a calm Christian sorrow on the faces of these works of art that one felt like consoling them. Here a child casts flowers upon its father's grave, and one forgets that the frail petals are of marble, as its fingers seem to let them fall. There a widow's fragile veil, or the ribbons in a maiden's hair, appear to tremble in the movement of the breeze. Seeing us speechless with admiration, and probably vexed because he could not feel as we did, an old gentleman who had been following us wherever we went, said, "What enthusiasts these French are!" Though he was as French as we were. Poor man! He would have been better at home, as far as I could see. Far from enjoying the journey, he was always grumbling, dissatisfied with the towns, the hotels, the people, and everything else. Father, who was happy wherever he was, tried to cheer him up. He offered him his seat in the carriage, and on other occasions too, and in his usual kind way tried to get him to look on the bright side, but he was still miserable. How many different sorts of people we met, and how interesting the study of the world becomes when one is just about to leave it. Venice brought a complete change of scene. No more the noise of the big town, but stillness, broken only by the soft lapping of the waters and the splashing of oars. It is an attractive yet melancholy city, and this melancholy envelops even the palace of the Doges for all its splendour. We passed through rooms whose vaulted roofs have long ceased to echo with the voice of governors pronouncing sentence of life or death. Prisoners are no longer buried alive in the gloomy dungeons, but the sight of those wretched cells made me think of the days of the martyrs, and I would gladly have been imprisoned in that darkness for my faith. I was awakened from my dreaming by the voice of the guide, and I crossed the Bridge of Sighs, so called because the prisoners, preferring death to the horrors underground, sighed with relief as they crossed it on the way to die. After Venice, Padua, where we venerated the relic of St. Anthony. Then Bologna, where St. Catherine's body lies. Her face still bears the impress of the infant Jesus' kiss. On to Loreto, with my heart full of joy. Our Lady certainly chose an ideal setting for their holy house. Everything poor and simple and primitive. The women still in their charming national costumes, not as elsewhere in the latest Paris fashions, and I was enchanted. But what of the holy house itself? This very roof had once sheltered the Holy Family. Our Lord's divine eyes had gazed upon these walls. The earth had known the sweat of Joseph's toil, and Mary had here borne Jesus in her womb, then in her arms. How deeply I was moved. I saw the little room where the Annunciation took place, and put my rosary in the bowl once used by Jesus as a child. What enchanting memories these are. The greatest joy of all was to receive Jesus in his own house and become his living temple in the very place where he had dwelt on earth. According to the Roman custom, the Blessed Eucharist is only reserved at one altar in each church, and the priest only gives communion to the faithful from there. In Loreto, this altar is in the basilica, which enshrines the holy house like a priceless diamond in a casket of white marble. This would not do for us. It was in the diamond, not merely in its casket, that we wished to be given the bread of angels. Father, docile as ever, followed the rest, but his daughters, who were more independent, made for the Santa Casa itself. A priest with special dispensation was saying Mass there, and we told him that we wished so much to do. This considerate priest at once asked for 2 small hosts and placed them on the paten. Can you guess what a joy that communion was, a joy beyond words? So what will an eternal communion be like in the house of the King of Heaven? The joy of that will never be clouded by the sadness of farewell. There will be no need to steal fragments from the walls which his presence sanctified, for his house will be all our own forever and ever. It is not his earthly house he wants to give us. He shows us that only to make poverty and the hidden life dear to us. It is his palace of glory that he is keeping for us, and we shall see him then, not in the guise of a child or under the form of bread, but as he is, radiant in his infinite beauty. I will tell you about Rome now. Rome, where I looked for consolation and found the cross. We arrived during the night. I had been sleeping in the carriage and was awakened by the shouting of porters, Roma, Roma. A cry soon picked up and echoed enthusiastically by the pilgrims. It was no dream. I was in Rome. We spent our first and perhaps most enjoyable day outside the walls, where everything still retains its air of antiquity, while in the centre of Rome the hotels and shops take one back to Paris. Our drive through Roman Campagna made a very deep impression on me, while I cannot say how thrilled I was in the Colosseum. Here at last I was seeing with my own eyes the arena where so many martyrs had shed their blood for Jesus, and I wanted to stoop and kiss the soil which their glorious trials had sanctified. What a disappointment! The ground had been razed, and the real arena was buried about 26 feet down. Out in the middle there was nothing but a mass of rubble where excavations had been going on, and even this was shut off by an insurmountable barrier. No one dared go in among such dangerous ruins. Yet could one possibly be in Rome and not go down? It was impossible, and from then on I did not take any notice of what the guide was saying. I could think of one thing only. I had to get down into the arena. The Gospel tells us that Magdalene stayed close to the tomb, constantly stooping to look inside, and at last saw 2 angels. Constantly stooping as she did, I saw at last not 2 angels, but at least what I was looking for, and with a cry of joy I said to Céline, "Follow me, there is a way through." We both ran forward at once, scrambling over the ruins, which crumbled under our feet, while Father shouted after us, astonished at our recklessness. But we did not hear. As warriors of old felt their courage grow in the face of danger, so our joy increased with our tiredness and the danger we faced to get our longed-for goal. Céline, who was more far-sighted than I, had been listening to the guide, who was describing a small stone cross which marked the place where the martyrs had fought the good fight. So she began looking round for it, and it was not long before we were kneeling on the sacred spot, our hearts united in a self-same prayer. My heart beat violently as I pressed my lips to the dust once reddened with the blood of the early Christians, and I asked for grace to be a martyr too for Jesus. At the bottom of my heart, I felt that I was heard. All this took only a short time, and having collected some stones, we returned to the walls, and the perilous climb began again. Father had not the heart to be cross with us when he saw how happy we were, and I saw he was even rather proud of our courage. After the Colosseum, we went to the Catacombs. Céline and I managed to lie down together in what had once been the tomb of Saint Cecilia, and to scoop up some of the earth which her sacred remains had sanctified. I had no particular devotion to her before the pilgrimage, but after I had visited the house where she was martyred and heard her called the Queen of Harmony because of the song she sang in her virginal heart to her divine spouse, it was more than devotion that I felt. It was the love of friendship, and she became my patroness and intimate confidant. What delighted me about her was the way she abandoned herself to God and her unbounded confidence, which enabled her to purify souls who had never desired anything but the joys of the world. I likened her to the spouse of the Canticles, finding in her the choir in an armed camp. For her life was simply a magnificent song amid the greatest of trials. This did not admonish me, because the Holy Gospels lay ever on her breast, while in her heart reposed the spouse of virgins. We visited the church of St. Agnes, and that delighted me too, and I met again one of the friends of my childhood. I tried to get a relic of hers for you, Mother, and was at first unlucky, but while men were refusing, God came to my help. A little piece of red marble fell from the mosaic, which dated back to the time of the gentle martyr, and landed at my feet. What a gracious gesture! St. Agnes herself had given me a keepsake from her own house. For 6 days we looked at all the principal wonders of Rome. On the 7th, I saw the greatest of them all, Leo XIII. I had longed for that day, yet dreaded it too, for it was to decide my vocation, and I had heard nothing from the Bishop of Bayeux. The Holy Father's sanction was my only hope, but I would have to ask for it first, and this involved speaking to him in front of cardinals, archbishops, and bishops. I trembled at the very thought. On Sunday morning, November 20th, we entered the Holy Father's private chapel in the Vatican and attended his Mass at 8 o'clock. His fervour at the altar, worthy of the Vicar of Christ, showed him to be really the Holy Father. The Gospel of the day contained these encouraging words: "Fear not, little flock, for it hath pleased the Father to give you a kingdom." A lively confidence took possession of my heart, my fears vanished, and I was sure the kingdom of Carmel would soon be mine. I was forgetting his other words: "I dispose to you as my Father hath disposed to me a kingdom." In other words, I have reserved for you the cross of trial, to make you worthy of my kingdom. Ought not Christ to have suffered these things and so enter into his glory? If you desire to sit on his right hand, you must drink the chalice which he has drunk himself. There followed a mass of thanksgiving. Then the audience began. Wearing a simple white cassock and a white cape, Leo XIII was sitting on a raised throne, surrounded by prelates and other dignitaries of the church. As was the custom, each pilgrim came forward in turn, knelt down and kissed the foot of the Supreme Pontiff, and then his hand, before receiving his blessing. 2 of the noble guard then touched him on the shoulder as a sign to rise and pass on, giving place to the next one. No one uttered a word. I had made up my mind to speak when Father Reveroni, standing on the right of His Holiness, announced in a loud voice that he absolutely forbade anyone to speak to the Holy Father. I turned a questioning gaze upon Céline with my heart beating wildly. "Speak," she whispered. A moment later I was on my knees before him and had kissed his slipper. He gave me his hand, then I raised my eyes, brimming with tears, to his and began my appeal. Most Holy Father, I want to ask you a great favour. He bent his head at once, his face almost touching mine, while his piercing black eyes seemed to be gazing into my soul. I began again. Most Holy Father, in honour of your Jubilee, let me enter Carmel at 15. The Vicar General of Bayeux was startled and far from pleased. Your Holiness, he interrupted, this is a child who wants to enter Carmel. The superiors are already going into the question. Very well, my child, said His Holiness. Do what the superiors decide. I clasped my hands and placed them on his knee while I made a final effort. Holy Father, if you said yes, everyone else will be willing. He gazed at me steadily and said, stressing every syllable, you will enter if it is God's will. As I was about to say more, 2 of the noble guard signed to me to get up, and when they saw that that was not enough, and that I stayed where I was with my clasped hands upon his knee, they pulled me up with the help of Father Reveroni. As they did so, the Holy Father gently touched my lips with his hand, and then lifted it in blessing. His eyes followed me a long way. Father had been in front of me and had no idea what had happened. He was most distressed to see me coming from the audience in tears. The Vicar General had been more than kind to him, presenting him as the father of 2 Carmelites, and Leo XIII had laid his hand on his head in sign of special favour, placing on him, as it were, a mysterious seal in the very name of Christ. Now that the father of 4 Carmelites is in heaven, there rests upon his forehead not the touch of Jesus' representative, but the hand of the spouse of virgins, the King of heaven. His divine hand will rest forever on the brow which he has crowned with so much glory. I was very much distressed, but since I had done everything I possibly could to respond to God's call, I must admit that, despite my tears, there was a great peace deep down in my heart, but only in the depths, for all the rest was bitterness. Jesus was silent, almost not there at all, for there was nothing to betray his presence. The sun did not dare shine that day either. Dark clouds filled the lovely blue of the Italian sky, whose tears were mingling unceasingly with mine. It was all over. My journey was to no purpose, its enchantment at an end. I ought to have been encouraged by the last words of the Holy Father, for they were really prophetic. In spite of all obstacles, God accomplished what he willed, bending the will of creatures to his own. For some time now, I had been offering myself to the child Jesus as his little plaything, telling him not to treat me as the sort of expensive toy that children only look at without daring to touch. I wanted him to treat me like a little ball, so valueless that it can be thrown on the ground, kicked about, pierced and left lying in a corner, or pressed close to his heart if he wants. In other words, I wished only to amuse the child Jesus and let him do with me exactly as he liked. Jesus had heard me, and in Rome he pierced his little plaything, because he wanted, I expect, to see what was inside. Then, satisfied with what he found, he dropped his little ball and fell asleep. What did he dream about? What happened to the abandoned little ball? Jesus dreamed that he was still playing, that he kept picking up his little ball and throwing it down again, that he rolled it far, far from him, but in the end held it close to his heart, never to let it slip from his hands again. You can guess how sad the little ball was, left lying on the ground, though it went on hoping against hope. Soon after the audience, Father had gone to see Brother Simeon, the founder and director of St. Joseph's College, and who should he meet there but Father Reveroni? He reproached him gently for not helping me through my ordeal, and told Brother Simeon all about it. The kind old man listened with great interest, and even made notes about it, saying with feeling, "That sort of thing does not happen in Italy." The day after the unforgettable audience, we had to leave for Naples and Pompeii. Vesuvius, with a dense column of smoke rising from its crater, fired in salute in our honour. While the havoc it had wrought in Pompeii was frightful, the power of God was there. He looketh upon the earth and maketh it tremble. He toucheth the mountains, and they smoke. I long to walk alone amid the ruins and ponder how transient all things human are, but such solitude was not to be thought of. While in Naples, we went for a magnificent drive up to the Monastery of San Martino, high on the hill which overlooks the city. On the way back, our horses took the bit between their teeth, and I'm sure it was only because our guardian angels were looking after us that we arrived safe and sound at our splendid hotel. And it was a splendid hotel. We had been staying at the best hotels, like royalty all the time. I had never been in such luxury. I should have been 1,000 times happier under a thatched roof with a hope of entering Carmel than I was in the midst of gilded apartments, marble staircases, and silk hangings, while my heart was in anguish. I learned from experience that joy does not reside in things about us, but in the very depths of the soul, that one can have it in the gloom of a dungeon, as well as in the palace of a king. I am happier now in Carmel, amid exterior and interior trials, than I ever was in the world, where I had all I wanted, and above all, so happy a home. Though my heart was plunged in sadness, I did not let it show outwardly, because I thought it had kept my petition to the Holy Father a secret, but I soon found I was wrong. One day, when Céline and I were alone in the carriage, waiting for the others who had gone into the buffet, Monseigneur Legoux appeared at the carriage door. He looked at me for some time, then said with a smile, "And how is our little Carmelite getting on?" I knew then that my secret was out, and various glances of sympathy in my direction only confirmed the fact, though luckily no one ever said anything to me about it. Then there was my little adventure in Assisi. We had been visiting the places hallowed by St. Francis and St. Clare when I lost the buckle of my belt in the monastery. It took me so long to find it and fix it on the belt again that I was some distance behind the others, and by the time I had gotten to the door, there was only one carriage left. It belonged to the Vicar General of Bayeux. Should I run after the carriages already out of sight, or ask Father Reveroni for a seat in his? I did not want to risk losing the train, so I decided that the latter course was the wiser. I tried to look quite composed in spite of the fact that I felt most embarrassed, and I explained my dilemma. This put him in an embarrassing position too, because his carriage was already completely full. But one of the gentlemen got out at once and made me take his place, while he took a humble seat by the driver. I felt like a squirrel in a cage, far from being at ease with important people all around me, and the most redoubtable and formidable of all, directly opposite. As it turned out, he was very kind to me, and every now and then he would interrupt his conversation to talk to me about Carmel. He promised me that he would do everything he possibly could to realise my desire to enter at 15. This promise was balm to my wounds, although it did not put an end to my suffering altogether. It had lost all confidence in mankind and was depending only on God, but my sadness did not prevent my taking a lively interest in the holy places we visited. I was so glad to see the shrine of Saint Magdalene of Pazzi in the choir of the Carmelite Church in Florence. All the pilgrims wanted to touch the saint's tomb with their rosaries, but as I was the only one with a hand small enough to go between the bars of the grating, the honourable task fell to me. I was proud to do it, but it took a very long time. This was not the first time I was so fortunate. Once when we were in Rome, venerating the relic of the true cross of Santa Croce, with 2 of the thorns and 1 of the sacred nails, I lingered behind to have more time to examine them, and as the monk who was looking after them was taking them back to the altar, I asked him to let me touch them. He said I might, though he did not seem to think I would be able to. I slipped my little finger through an opening in the reliquary and was able to touch the nail once covered with the blood of Jesus. As you can see, I was treating him as a child would who thinks it can do what it likes, looking upon its father's treasures as its own. From Florence to Pisa, on to Genoa, and then began the return journey to France. The route by which we came back was really lovely, the railway running alongside the sea for miles, so close at one point that the stormy waves seemed almost on top of us. Then through plains rich with orange groves, olives and slender palms. When evening came, the seaports were all ablaze with glittering lights, while up above the first stars trembled in the darkening blue. My fairyland faded, leaving no regrets, for my heart was set on far more wonderful things. Nevertheless, Father was already planning another journey, this time to Jerusalem. Naturally, I should have liked to visit the places hallowed by the feet of our Lord, but I was weary of earthly pilgrimages. Longing only for the beauties of heaven, I wanted to become a prisoner as soon as possible to win them for others. Though I knew I still had to struggle and suffer before I saw the gates of my blessed prison open to let me in, I lost none of my confidence. I should enter on December 25th, Christmas Day. Home again in Lisieux, I went to Carmel. But what an interview! I expect you remember it, Mother. At the end of my resources, I left it all to you, and you said I should write and remind the bishop of his promise. I lost no time in doing as you advised, and once the letter was in the post, I was sure he would say I could enter immediately. Every day a fresh disappointment. Christmas came with all its beauty, and Jesus slept on. He left his little ball upon the ground, and never so much as looked at it. What a trial! But he whose heart is ever watchful taught me that he works miracles even for those whose faith it is like a tiny mustard seed, to make it grow, while, as in the case of his mother, he works miracles for his dearest friends only after he has tested their faith. He let Lazarus die, even though Martha and Mary had sent word that he was sick. And when he asked our Lord at the marriage feast of Cana to help the master of the house, he said his time had not yet come. But after the trial, what rewards? Lazarus rises from the dead, and water becomes wine. This is how her beloved dealt with his Therese. A long testing, and then he realised all her dreams. January 1st, 1888. My New Year's present from Jesus was the cross. I had a letter from Mother Mary Gonzaga to say the bishop's answer had come on December 28th, authorising my entry at once, but that she had decided to wait until after Lent. I burst into tears at the thought of such a delay. What a peculiar trial! The dove was free to fly to the ark, but the ark refused to let her in. Those 3 months were rich in sufferings, but richer still in graces. At first I saw no reason why I should add to my sufferings any longer by such a strict life, but God made me realise the value of extra time He gave me. I made up my mind to more serious mortification than ever. When I say mortification, I do not mean the sort of penance the saints undertake. I was not like those grand souls who practice all kinds of penances from childhood. My mortification consisted in checking my self-will, keeping back an impatient word, doing little things for those around me without their knowing, and countless things like that. By these little things, I made ready to become the spouse of Jesus, and I cannot tell you how I grew in abandonment, humility, and other virtues as a result.